Picture this scenario. You're standing in line at the grocery store and your card gets declined. Your stomach drops as you frantically check your bank account on your phone, hoping it's just some technical glitch. But there it is in black and white. Insufficient funds. You mumble an apology to the cashier, abandon your cart, and walk out feeling like everyone is staring at you. Sound familiar? Well, what if I told you there's a specific moment when this kind of financial embarrassment becomes a thing of the past forever? Most people think building wealth is about hitting massive milestones like 100,000 or $1 million. But here's something that might surprise you. There's a much smaller number that creates a fundamental shift in how you experience money on a daily basis. That number is $10,000. My name is Chris, and I spend way too much time analyzing the psychology of money and why some people seem to effortlessly navigate financial challenges, while others are constantly stressed about their next paycheck. If you're someone who wants to understand the real mechanics behind financial security, instead of just hoping things will magically improve, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up helping you see money differently. Now, before we dive into what makes $10,000 so transformative, let me ask you something. When you think about your relationship with money, what emotion comes up first? Is it excitement about future possibilities? Or is it anxiety about whether you'll have enough to cover your basic needs? For most people living paycheck to paycheck, money represents stress, limitation, and constant calculation. Every purchase becomes a careful negotiation with your bank balance. Every unexpected expense feels like a potential catastrophe that could derail your entire month. But here's what's fascinating about human psychology. There are certain financial thresholds that act like invisible barriers between different ways of experiencing life. Once you cross them, the rules of the game completely change. $10,000 is the first major threshold that separates those who react to money from those who control it. And the crazy part is most people have no idea this threshold even exists. Think about it this way. If you've ever tried to start a campfire, you know that getting those first flames going is the hardest part. You're blowing on tiny sparks, adding kindling carefully, and wondering if you'll ever get a real fire started. But once you reach that critical point where the flames catch hold, everything changes. The fire starts feeding itself, growing stronger, and eventually you have a roaring campfire that maintains itself. $10,000 is that critical point where your financial situation stops feeling like you're desperately trying to keep tiny sparks alive and starts feeling like you have actual fire working in your favor. Most people think wealth building is a perfectly linear process. Save $1, you're $1 closer to your goal. Save $10, you're $10 closer. But that's not how financial psychology actually works. The reality is much more interesting and honestly much more encouraging than that simple math would suggest. When you don't have any money saved, your brain operates in what psychologists call scarcity mode. Every financial decision gets filtered through fear and survival instincts. You take the first job offer that comes along, even if it's terrible, because you can't afford to be selective. You stay in situations you hate because leaving feels too dangerous. You say yes to things you don't want to do because you desperately need the income. This isn't just about being practical or responsible. When you're in scarcity mode, your brain literally cannot think about growth and opportunity. It's like trying to plan a vacation while your house is burning down. All your mental energy gets consumed by immediate threats and short-term survival. But something remarkable happens when you accumulate your first $10,000. Suddenly, your brain has space to think differently. Instead of asking, how do I survive until next Friday, you start asking, how can I improve my situation? Instead of being reactive to whatever financial crisis pops up next, you become proactive about building a better future. This shift might sound subtle, but it affects every single decision you make going forward. Research from leading financial institutions shows that having just $2,000 in emergency savings increases your financial well-being by over 20%. $2,000. That's less than most people spend on a vacation or a fancy laptop. But that small buffer creates a massive psychological shift because it moves you out of pure survival mode. When you push that emergency fund to 6 months of living expenses, which for most people lands somewhere around $10,000, you get another significant boost in financial well-being. But more importantly, you've created enough breathing room for your brain to start thinking about wealth building instead of just wealth preservation. Here's where things get really interesting from a practical standpoint. Let's say your monthly expenses are around $1,500, which includes rent, food, transportation, and basic necessities. Without any savings, a single unexpected expense of $500 throws your entire financial plan into chaos. Maybe your car needs repairs, or you have a medical bill, or your laptop dies right when you need it most. That $500 emergency forces you to either put it on a credit card, borrow money from family, or somehow scramble to find extra income immediately. But when you have $10,000 sitting in your savings account, that same $500 emergency becomes a minor inconvenience. You're annoyed, sure, but you're not panicked. You handle the expense, maybe adjust your budget slightly for the next month, and move on with your life. This shift from panic to mild annoyance might seem small, but it has ripple effects throughout your entire existence. When you're not constantly worried about money, you make better decisions in general. You sleep better at night because you're not lying awake calculating whether you can afford groceries and rent in the same week. You're more productive at work because you're not distracted by financial stress. You're more patient with your family and friends because you're not carrying the emotional weight of financial insecurity everywhere you go. Financial stress affects every aspect of human behavior, and removing that stress unlocks mental energy that you can redirect toward actually improving your situation. Studies show that people with emergency funds report significantly better sleep quality, lower levels of anxiety, and improved relationships compared to those without savings. It turns out financial insecurity is one of the leading causes of depression and family conflict, and eliminating that insecurity has immediate benefits that extend far beyond just money. Your relationships improve as well, because money stress is cited as one of the primary causes of arguments between couples and family members. When you're not constantly worried about bills, you have more emotional energy to invest in the people you care about. You're less irritable, less defensive, and more present in your interactions with others. There's also a confidence factor that's hard to measure, but impossible to ignore. When you know you have money in the bank, you carry yourself differently in professional situations. You negotiate salary and benefits more effectively. Because you're not operating from a place of desperation. You're more willing to walk away from bad deals or toxic work environments because you have options. This confidence often results in better job opportunities and higher compensation, creating a positive feedback loop that accelerates your financial progress even further. But here's something that most people don't realize about the $10,000 milestone, and it might be the most important point in this entire video. The majority of the benefit doesn't actually come from spending the money. It comes from knowing the money is there. This is what financial experts call the emergency fund effect, and it's probably one of the most underrated concepts in personal finance. An emergency fund isn't really about the emergencies. It's about the transformation that happens in your mind when you know you can handle emergencies. Most people who build up $10,000 in savings never actually spend it on true emergencies. Instead, they spend it on opportunities. They invest in education that could boost their earning potential. They take calculated risks on business ventures. They move to better locations for career advancement. They simply have the mental bandwidth to focus on growth because they're not constantly worried about basic survival. There's also something fascinating that happens to your decision-making process once you cross this threshold. Before you have savings, every choice feels like it could be a mistake that ruins everything. Should you take that new job in a different city? What if it doesn't work out and you can't afford to move back? Should you invest in learning a new skill? What if you spend the money and it doesn't pay off? These questions become paralyzing when you don't have a financial safety net. But when you have $10,000 saved, these same decisions become manageable, calculated risks. You're not necessarily going to quit your job tomorrow and become a professional street performer, but you might finally have the confidence to pursue that promotion you've been thinking about for months. You might be willing to invest in yourself by taking a certification course that could significantly increase your earning potential. The safety net doesn't make you reckless, but it does give you permission to think beyond just making it to the next paycheck. Here's something else that changes in ways you probably never expected. Your relationship with time completely shifts. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're trapped in an endless cycle of short-term thinking. You can't plan more than 2 weeks ahead because you don't know what financial crisis might emerge. But when you have that buffer, you can start thinking in months and years instead of days and weeks. This extended time horizon affects everything from your career planning to your personal relationships. You can commit to long-term goals because you're not constantly worried about immediate survival. You can make investments in yourself that might take months or even years to pay off because you know you'll be financially stable during that waiting period. Let's talk about what $10,000 can actually accomplish in practical terms, because the specific dollar amount matters more than you might think. This amount covers almost any car repair short of needing a completely new engine. Most automotive emergencies fall somewhere between $500 and $3,000. With $10,000 in the bank, car problems shift from potential financial disasters to manageable inconveniences. Medical emergencies become survivable too. Even without great insurance, most urgent care visits, emergency room trips, or minor procedures fall within this range. You're not going to cover major surgery with $10,000, but you can handle the vast majority of health issues that pop up unexpectedly without destroying your financial stability. Job loss, which is probably the most terrifying financial scenario for most working people, becomes something you can actually navigate. $10,000 provides roughly 3 to 6 months of breathing room to find new employment, depending on your living expenses. That's enough time to be strategic about your next opportunity instead of desperately accepting the first offer that comes along, even if it's a terrible fit. But perhaps the most significant change is how this milestone affects your earning potential. When you're not constantly stressed about money, you perform better at work. You're more creative, more willing to take on challenging projects, and more likely to speak up with valuable ideas. Financial stress literally reduces cognitive function, and removing that stress unlocks mental capacity you didn't even know you had. People with financial security are also more likely to pursue additional education, start side businesses, or develop skills that could lead to higher income. Not because they suddenly became more ambitious, but because they finally have the mental space and resources to invest in their own growth. There's a mathematical reality that makes $10,000 particularly powerful in terms of opportunity cost. This amount of money can serve as seed capital for investments that could multiply your wealth over time. But most people never reach this point because they spend every dollar they earn on immediate consumption instead of delayed gratification. Consider this scenario. You have a friend who mentions they're starting a business and looking for a small investor. Without savings, you can only wish them luck and maybe feel a little envious. With $10,000, you have the option to invest $2,000 or $3,000 and potentially participate in something that could change your financial trajectory. The safety net doesn't just protect you from disasters, it creates access to opportunities that broke people simply cannot take advantage of. The compound effect extends beyond just the money itself. Having savings changes how other people perceive you and interact with you. Banks are more likely to approve you for loans when you have substantial savings. Landlords prefer tenants who can demonstrate financial stability. Even employers sometimes view candidates with emergency funds as more responsible and reliable. This creates a positive feedback loop where financial stability leads to more opportunities, which lead to increased income, which leads to even greater financial stability. Meanwhile, people without savings often find themselves trapped in negative cycles where financial instability creates barriers to the very opportunities that could improve their situation. But here's something that might surprise you about the psychology of reaching this milestone. The hardest part isn't actually saving the money itself. The hardest part is developing the identity of someone who saves money consistently. Most people approach saving like it's a temporary diet where they drastically cut expenses for a few months, save aggressively, and then burn out and return to their old spending habits. The people who successfully reach $10,000 don't think of saving as a temporary sacrifice. They think of it as becoming a different type of person. This identity shift affects every financial decision going forward because when you see yourself as someone who builds wealth, you start noticing opportunities and making choices that align with that identity. The beautiful thing about this transformation is that it gets progressively easier as you go. Saving your first $1,000 requires massive willpower and significant lifestyle adjustments. Every dollar feels precious because you're breaking old habits and establishing new ones. But saving your second thousand becomes noticeably easier because you've already rewired your brain to prioritize long-term security over immediate gratification. By the time you're working toward your fifth or sixth thousand, the process starts feeling almost automatic. You've developed systems for tracking expenses. You've identified areas where you can consistently cut costs without feeling deprived. And most importantly, you've proven to yourself that delayed gratification actually works. This creates momentum that carries you through the inevitable moments when you're tempted to give up or spend your savings on something that seems important in the moment. There's also a social component to this milestone that most people don't anticipate. When you don't have savings, you're often forced to decline social opportunities because they cost money you simply can't afford. Maybe your friends want to go on a weekend trip, but you can't justify the expense when you're worried about making rent. Perhaps there's a wedding in another city, but travel costs feel impossible when you're living paycheck to paycheck. This creates a gradual isolation where you start missing out on experiences and relationships because your financial situation limits your options. But when you have $10,000 saved in life, you can participate fully. More. You're not saying yes to every expensive invitation, but you can make choices based on what you actually want to do rather than what you can afford something. Here, fascinating about human behavior that becomes obvious once you reach this threshold. The way you think about risk completely changes, and this shift affects decisions that have nothing to do with money. When you're financially insecure, you avoid all types of risk because you can't afford for anything to go wrong. You stick with jobs you hate, relationships that drain you, and living situations that hold you back because change feels too dangerous. But financial security gives you permission to take calculated risks in other areas of your life. Maybe you finally end that toxic friendship because you're not worried about losing social connections when money is tight. Perhaps you speak up about problems at work because you know you could survive being fired. You might even pursue hobbies or interests that seemed too risky or unconventional when you were focused solely on survival. This ripple effect extends into your physical health as well. People without savings often skip preventive medical care because they can't afford the upfront costs, even when they know it could save money long term. They might ignore concerning symptoms until they become emergencies, because they're hoping the problem will resolve itself. With $10,000 saved, you can invest in your health proactively instead of reactively. You're more likely to join a gym, buy better food, or take time off work when you're sick because you're not constantly worried about the financial implications of every health-related decision. This leads to better physical outcomes, which in turn supports your ability to earn income and continue building wealth. Let's address something that probably sounds familiar. You might be thinking that $10,000 feels impossibly far away, especially if you're currently struggling to save even a few $100s per month. The good news is that this milestone is more achievable than most people realize, and the path to get there doesn't require extreme measures or dramatic lifestyle changes. The average household spends over $4,000 annually on dining out, entertainment subscriptions, impulse purchases, and convenience items. That's not including major expenses like car payments or vacations. If you could redirect just 25% of that discretionary spending towards savings, you'd have your $10,000 in less than 4 years without making any other changes to your lifestyle. Most people have far more flexibility in their budgets than they recognize. They've just never taken the time to track where their money actually goes each month. When you start paying attention to your spending patterns, you'll probably discover several $100s per month that's disappearing on things you don't really value or even remember purchasing. The key is starting with whatever amount feels manageable, even if it's just $25 per week. The habit is more important than the initial amount because habits can be scaled up as your income grows or as you find additional ways to reduce expenses. Someone who consistently saves $25 weekly will almost inevitably find ways to save $50 weekly once the behavior becomes automatic. There's also the income side of the equation, which becomes much easier to address once you're not constantly stressed about money. When you have breathing room, you can invest time in developing skills that lead to higher compensation. You can network more effectively because you're not approaching every interaction from a place of desperation. You can negotiate more confidently because you have options. Many people discover that their income naturally increases as they build savings, not through luck or coincidence, but because financial security creates conditions that support career advancement. You take on challenging projects because you're not afraid of potential failure. You speak up in meetings because you're not worried about job security. You pursue opportunities that might not work out immediately because you can afford to think long term. Here's something that might change how you think about this entire process. The person with $10,000 saved has already developed the most important wealth building skill, which isn't earning money or picking investments. It's the ability to consistently spend less than they earn and prioritize future security over immediate gratification. This skill becomes increasingly valuable as your income grows throughout your career. Someone who earns $40,000 but saves 15% will build more wealth over their lifetime than someone who earns $80,000 but saves nothing. The difference isn't intelligence or luck or even earning potential. It's mindset and habits. Reaching $10,000 proves that you've mastered these fundamental concepts, which means you're positioned to take advantage of every future opportunity to build wealth, whether that's through employer retirement matching, real estate investments, starting a business, or simply continuing to save and invest consistently. You now have the foundation that makes all other wealth building strategies possible. The transformation that happens when you save your first $10,000 creates momentum that extends far beyond that specific dollar amount. It's not just about having money in the bank. It's about becoming the type of person who builds financial security systematically and consistently over time. And once you've proven to yourself that you can save $10,000, something interesting happens with your relationship to money itself. You stop seeing it as this finite resource that just disappears every month and start understanding it as a tool that can actually multiply your options. Before you have savings, money feels scarce and temporary. Every dollar spent is a dollar gone forever, vanishing into rent payments, grocery bills, and gas tanks. But when you have that $10,000 foundation working as your safety net, you begin to grasp that money can actually create more money. This is where people start getting genuinely interested in concepts like investing, side businesses, and passive income streams. Not because they suddenly became financial wizards overnight, but because they finally have the mental bandwidth to think beyond covering basic expenses. When you're not constantly worried about keeping the lights on, you can start wondering about building something bigger. When you're not stressed about grocery money, you can start researching how the stock market actually works. This shift from survival thinking to growth thinking is probably the most valuable transformation that happens at this milestone. Here's something that will probably make you laugh or cry depending on your current situation. The person with $10,000 saved is actually closer to achieving real financial independence than someone with zero savings, even if that second person earns twice as much income. Why? Because the saver has developed the most crucial skill in wealth building, which isn't making money, it's keeping money. You probably know people who earn impressive salaries, but somehow always seem broke. They drive expensive cars, live in fancy apartments, eat at restaurants that charge $15 for a basic sandwich, but they have absolutely nothing saved. Meanwhile, you might know someone who makes a modest income but has managed to accumulate substantial savings through intentional spending choices. The difference isn't income level, it's mindset. And reaching $10,000 in savings is like completing a masterclass in developing the right financial psychology. You learn to distinguish between things you want and things you actually need. You become skilled at finding ways to reduce expenses without feeling like you're punishing yourself. Most importantly, you develop the patience to delay immediate gratification for long-term benefits. This patience becomes your secret weapon in every future financial decision. That new car might look appealing, but you've trained yourself to think about opportunity costs. That expensive vacation might seem tempting, but you've learned to weigh short-term pleasure against long-term security. These aren't deprivation decisions anymore. They're strategic choices made by someone who understands how money actually works. So there you have it. $10,000 isn't just a number sitting in your savings account. It's a complete transformation that touches every corner of your existence. From sleeping soundly at night to walking into job interviews with genuine confidence instead of quiet desperation, this milestone creates a cascade of changes that most people never see coming. If you're currently staring at a bank balance that looks more like pocket change, don't get discouraged. Start small, stay consistent, and remember that the person you become while building your first 10,000 is infinitely more valuable than the money itself.